to begin, my name is Sky Dillon Robbins. I'm the executive director and founder of the Video Consortium, which is a nonprofit global network that brings together and supports and connects the next generation of documentary filmmakers and video journalists. And I'm happy to report that all 4 of these beautiful people here are VC members, and we're really excited to be partnering with the wonderful Double Exposure Film Festival in bringing this panel to life. So without further ado, why don't we begin and have everyone introduce themselves. So Leslie Davis, where are you from? Where are you based? And what is your film? And what do you do?
So I am from Kentucky, and I'm based here in Brooklyn, New York. And I'm a freelance documentary filmmaker and journalist. And my film was made for the New York Times, where I worked for a long time, and Netflix. It's called Father, Soldier, Son. And I directed and produced it with my partner, Katrin Einhorn, who also still works at the Times.
Amazing. Quincy Ledbetter, where are you? What do you do? What's your film?
Hi, everyone. I'm Quincy Ledbetter. I'm originally from Woodbridge, Virginia, right outside of DC, but now I'm also in Brooklyn, New York. I am a filmmaker, musician, and artist, and my film is called Elude the Dreamer. It's actually a narrative film, but I, for a long time, I was working in digital media and news agencies doing documentaries, and I still do nonfiction as well.
Superb. Elizabeth Lowe, what's your film and where are you beaming in from?
Hi, I'm Elizabeth, and I directed Stray, a feature-length documentary released by Magnolia Pictures and now streaming on Hulu about an observational film that follows street dogs in Istanbul and all the conversations and human dramas that unfold around them. And I am beaming in from Los Angeles.
Amazing. And Jenny, wait, tell us.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Jenny Shi. I'm originally from Shanghai, China, and now I'm based in Chicago as a documentary filmmaker and a video journalist. And my film Finding Ying Ying is about a 26-year-old Chinese student who vanished from the campus of University of Illinois in 2017. But the film is not really about the investigation. It's more about a young talented woman and how much her life has touched others. And right now the film is streaming on Paramount Plus, and it's an MTV documentary film production. Yeah.
Fabulous. And you're in Chicago.
Yeah.
Great. So I think the magic of this group of people is that it's a testament to the fact that every feature documentary or narrative feature, but every feature has its own path, and you can come at it from multiple different ways and kind of do it the way you want it, in a sense. We did prepare for all of y'all watching a very quick rundown of the basics of each of these films, and this is going to be really great context for us as we. Oh my gosh, I can't. Can I not do it? Oh man, let's see. I should be able to do it. Maybe I can do it in one. So this is Quincy's. Here we go. So these are the basics of each of their films, and this is good context for as we dive into these discussions. And you can find out more about each of these amazing films through these links. And of course, Jenny's is right here. Feel free to copy and paste these and screenshot these. Great, here we are. So we have all 4 in the chat if anyone wants to take a look. So this discussion, it's going to be an hour and a half, and we're going to break it down. It's going to be very low key, and we're just going to dive right in and get into pre-production, production, post-production, things that everyone has kind of learned that they had no idea they needed to know, or secrets that they would pass on to all of y'all who are watching. And then we'll do questions at the end. If you do have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, and we will get to them at the end of each section break or at the end itself. Okay, y'all, so let's start. To start a feature doc, starting is the hardest part in a sense, right? And everyone kind of came at their film.
Apologies, Sky. Just letting you know that you're chatting just to the panelists. You want to just make sure that you're chatting to putting messages to everyone so that the attendees can see the links.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much.
No
It
worries.
says host and panelists, and y'all, I'm so sorry. Okay, here we go. Thank you so much. All right, number one, I'm going to talk and copy and paste at the same time. Leslie, why don't we start with you? You didn't know you were making a feature. I mean, most of us didn't know that you were making features in the beginning. But Leslie, tell us about your kind of initial journey of how it started.
Yeah, so Father Soldier Son started as a project at the New York Times called A Year at War. It started actually while I was still in college. I remember watching it and seeing the stories, thinking it was a really fantastic project. It covered a lot of soldiers in one single battalion and their families coping with what it was like to have someone overseas serving in the Afghanistan war while their families were home. So yeah, I covered a variety of topics, but one of them was what it was like on the home front. And that was the characters that we ultimately decided to go back and follow, the Aish family. It was two young sons and their father was away serving in the war, and he ended up getting injured. And that's kind of where there was a short film that was made by Marcus Yam and Nancy Donaldson-Gauss and my partner, Katrin. It was a short on the New York Times website. It was like stills and audio, kind of like of the multimedia era of journalism, which is like a funny place that I see a lot of projects start in this like multimedia time. And then my partner, Kat, reached out to me one Saturday and said, Brian, the subject of the film, is getting his leg amputated after many years of like living in pain, 4 years. And do you want to do a follow-up on him? So we started working on something that was intended to be an ambitious piece of short form journalism, long form in the world of journalism, short form in the world of dog. And didn't expect to work on it for more than probably a year. But things just kept happening in their lives, and we had the support of the Times. Like each time a little of something extra happened, we'd extend the project by another shoot, and then another shoot, and then another shoot. And it grew to the point where it just became clear that we needed to partner with another organization in order to put the work in its best form in a place where people go to watch long form documentary film. So it ended up, the whole project took 10 years in total, and the kind of like follow-up that we started was 6 years, and 6 of that 10 years. And you see the family like grow and change over that period of time. And yeah, it was a very incremental process of going from a true short on a newspaper site to a long form short, less than 40 minutes, to like, oh, we're making a film. That process took like 6 years. So.
And did you ever expect that it would be a feature in the beginning? Would you have had any idea?
I certainly was looking for projects to develop in that way, but no, I don't think there was no part. I thought we would make something ambitious and really good, but not feature length. That wasn't the newspaper space I was working in, wasn't doing that, but it's certainly, as we worked on this film and evolved in that way on this project, that space also opened up in this way. And now we see more of that coming from legacy media organizations.
Absolutely. And that's wonderful. And kind of the opposite side of that story, in a sense, Liz, maybe you could give some context, because yours came, Leslie, you had such an incredible story. And what was also pivotal was the New York Times, like helping. Versus on the other side, Liz, yours was very indie made in a sense. And rejection is also like a really big part of that process. And we all experience that. Everyone here watching us experiences that. Tell us a bit about the starting process of yours.
Yeah, so I always knew originally that I wanted to make a feature, because I've made a bunch of shorts, and I knew that I wanted to make a feature-length documentary that was just following dogs around. And also, like, my point was not that all dogs should be housed, it was that all dogs should be allowed to roam freely. And I remember when I was applying for funding, one funder memorably told me, you know, you're pursuing a very obscure topic, stray dogs, nobody cares about them, they're going to outlast us, and you have a very obscure take on an obscure topic, so you have like a twofold challenge in fundraising. And so we didn't get a lot of support in the beginning, and finally I decided to just go out there and shoot for a little bit just to get a sample tape. And when we came back, we edited that sample tape together to see if the concept would work, like humanity through the eyes of dogs. So it was like a little bit experimental, and also technologically, we want to see if we could achieve that. And there was a period where I thought, if I don't get support, then I'll just turn this into a short film. But then we kept applying to things. And by this point, it was already 3 years into the idea sort of inception. Then we got support from IFP Film Week, and then started pitching it to people, and got support from Rooftop Films, which gave us an equipment grant. So then I felt like, okay, we have to go out and make this film anyway. And then so we shot for 5 months straight and came back with all this footage that we ended up cutting into a film that in the end buyers really wanted it and liked it. And it, you know, festivals played it despite it not having that much institutional support. And so it felt like a vindication by the end of the film that it was a difficult film to articulate to people and funders, because it didn't particularly lend itself to words because of the subject matter, which is like trying to expand our consciousness into a non-human space. But at the end, there probably is a home for your film if you're drawn to the subject matter. At least some people will also be.
Absolutely. And it's such an amazing film. And I noticed you can see the really wonderful poster behind Elizabeth's shoulder. So there's that. Can we talk a little bit about the importance of the sample reel or tape? I feel like that kind of straddles all aspects of projects. Quincy, maybe why don't you talk about that? Just, you know, the concept, showing people visually what you're thinking is pivotal, and sometimes you have to do it yourself, like Elizabeth did.
Yeah, absolutely. So for my feature, we made a proof of concept for it, and it was absolutely crucial to getting the funding and getting the studios behind it. So the way I came into my feature was I had written a script, and I was sending it to, you know, submitting it to a bunch of like, you know, festivals and screenwriting contests and grants and all this stuff, and constantly getting rejected, just like constantly. I was like, well, you know, what do I do this for? But then I submitted it to an initiative that BET and Paramount Players was doing called Project Create, and they liked the script, and I sort of like kept working my way up the ladder. And at that point, I'd been a finalist in a bunch of things, so I didn't really think much of it. But then they reached out and said that they wanted a proof of concept for the feature. And fortunately, like the years and years and years of doing this, I had developed the skill set to like make a proof of concept on the cheap. So I made a proof of concept. I chose like a scene from the film, and I sort of like cobbled this thing together with next to no money, and sent it in. And that, you know, they liked it so much that they flew me out to LA to pitch to a bunch of execs, and that's how I got the funding for the film.
That's amazing. And, you know, I see this great question from Shako that kind of goes back to, Liz, what you were talking about. It's like, how do you assemble a crew at the beginning when you don't have funding? So like to make your sample, when you have no resources, what do you do? You know, or what did you do?
For me, it was 2 years of applying to grants and getting rejected. And I decided but at that point, I had also been working on a bunch of short films and making money and doing some commercial projects. And so I used my own savings to pay people sort of lower rates to try to make this sample. And people were really interested in the idea and got behind the project. And so they were willing to lower their rates. And then also with like your producers, they're fundraising with you together, and people are, nobody's getting paid, at least when you're the producer and the director at first, until you're able to raise some funding. And I think there's some structures where you have percentages of the filmmaker pool or the talent pool and things like that you eventually get paid back if you make a profit.
Yeah, roping people in because they believe in your project too. Jenny, talk to us. So your film has a very cool and interesting initiation story. Yours started at Northwestern, right?
Yeah, so I was a journalism student at Northwestern in 2017, actually. And this project started with a student project. So I still remember it was the last quarter of my graduate program at Northwestern. Ying disappeared. And at first, I didn't really think about, making a film about it. But I just feel like, this is something important and related to me, as Ying and I, we were both Chinese international students coming to the US to study. And I feel like this could potentially be like maybe a short project. And I was like working on a school project. And in that class, I need to create like a 20-minute short like student film, student documentary, for that class. So I decided to pursue Ying's story. And I think I just followed the family for 2 months just to create something for school. But after I graduated, I feel like, the story still continued, and there are so much things going to happen in future. And I feel like there's a potential to, continue follow story and to see like what I could get. And after I graduated, my former professor who taught me at Northwestern, he came on board as a producer. So kind of like he guided me to, basically told me who I should reach out to. Because as a journalism student, I knew nothing about filmmaking and I knew nothing about documentary production, honestly. So he helped me a lot, and I got a chance to connect with Cartanquin Films, which is based in Chicago, and I got into their fellowship. And I think throughout the fellowship, Cartanquin Films helped me to basically learn how to, write proposal, create like a work sample, and how to pitch your short sample, pitch your story to potential founders and financiers and distributors. And I think that took me 2 years. And during the 2 years, I've been applying for grants and got no from everyone. And just like Liz, I've been basically, paying everything like out of my pockets. And since it was me and my friend who were filming, we didn't really like charge anything. We were just like trying to cover like transportation and meals, things like that. And it was in 2019, actually. That was the time we feel like we really need an editor to edit. Before that, it was me like editing all the like work samples, things like that. At that time, we still didn't have any like grant money, but we started to think about other ways to, for fundraising. So we had some like donations and also have some private investments. So basically that's the majority of the funding, where the funding came from. And after we finished the film, we sold the film. So that's how the above line like staff got paid back. So that's pretty much the journey. And it took, I think it didn't took that long compared with other folks. It's 3 years. So for me, it was my like first feature, and basically, a learning process, for everything. Yeah.
Totally. The whole making your first feature is the biggest learning process in a sense. Let's move on to the production aspect of doing this. Y'all, overall, what would you say? Everyone here has made really great shorts, and transitioning into a feature is like, it's a whole different world. Even the idea of like logging footage, or Quincy, you did a narrative film, but it's similar in that you're dealing with a whole different, it's a whole different ballgame. Anyone like what are some things that stuck out in terms of just the biggest differences or biggest learning experiences that you had no idea as previously a shorts maker?
I was surprised at, so it is very different, but I was also surprised at how similar it was. You know what I mean? Like, me being on the field at Standing Rock felt similar to setting up a scene in Atlanta with all this crew. You know what I mean? It's the intensity of it and the stakes of it felt similar to me, and I was pulling from the same sort of basket of skill sets. I think the thing that was different was, and I don't want to sound, the thing that was different was like when I was in the field doing nonfiction, I didn't have anyone in my ear like, you know what I'm saying? It wasn't like, hey, I think the character should do this, and I didn't have that. But and the other thing that was different was, usually when I would do nonfiction, it'd be extremely small crew, like maybe me, one other person on camera, or me, one other person on camera, and the producer. With my feature, it was, I want to say at least 35 people on set, you know what I mean? So like the stakes felt high, but in a different way. It's like, oh wow, I'm employing all these people, you know what I mean? So it felt different in that way. But as far as like the skill set that it took, for me, it was the exact same. I was actually surprised by like, oh, how like, oh, I'm doing the same thing with this project, despite the budget and the size that I would with a no budget, nonfiction piece. It just felt very similar.
Totally. So it's like, y'all, for everyone who's watching, if you can successfully make a short, you can probably make a feature. You can definitely make a feature. Anyone else? Learnings? Leslie,
I think one of the mistakes I made in making my first feature was I went out for like a 5-month chunk living in Turkey, following dogs. And I think had I been wiser, but I did that because we got the camera grant and I want to extend it as long as possible. But I think looking back, I wish I had just gone out in like 6-week chunks or 4-week chunks. Then you come back and you edit, you figure out what your story really is, and you go out again. My way was like a little bit more inefficient because we were following dogs and even in cities that didn't end up making it into the project. And had I known exactly who my main character was, I would have invested more time and resources into that main character. So that was like a big learning, chopping up your production in chunks rather than doing it for long.
And as a follow-up to that, in being away for so long, was it overwhelming to log the footage at night, or like, did you try to edit while you were filming, or you know what I mean?
Yeah, I didn't edit at all while I was filming because I would be exhausted at the end of every night because we would spend like 10 hours every day sort of just following the dogs around. So I logged the footage, but I wouldn't edit it. And so, yeah,
cool.
Which is not wise, I think. I don't know.
It worked out.
It worked out really well. I was gonna say that it just some like practical logistical things, pushing for more time in the beginning is normal. And like the people who are funding your production, it's their job to push you to do it faster with less money and less resources because it's cheaper. But it's your job to push back from the other direction and say, I need more time. More time will make the movie better. We need more funding to get more time, and that you eventually meet in the middle somewhere, but that it's normal to push for that and that your film will suffer if you don't. It's less about like, I think coming from the shorts world and like VC Video Consortium is such a supportive community that like, I wasn't used to having to fight for things in that. I mean, I was used to having to fight for things, but not like the way you have to kind of push for time when you are editing a feature. And that was a good lesson. And then I mean, this is a very like practical opinion based thing, but I learned the joy of editing long form in Avid, which was Premiere is so great. I really love both editing systems, but Avid was such a collaborative software. And we also had to push for that. We had to have our entire project converted from Premiere to Avid at the beginning of the experience, which was crazy. But I remember like begging for people to tell me like, what should we do? What should we do? And I'm really glad we ultimately I think for the collaboration that we were doing, it was really good.
That's really insightful. Jenny, anything from you? Big learnings?
Yeah, I think for me, the biggest lesson I learned is just to be prepared for anything, like anything gonna happen. I think like it all depends on the story you are doing. Like for me, because I've been following like the family for such a long time. I mean, even though I spent like I filmed with them like for 5 months when they first came here, but I've been visited with them like almost every week, and sometimes I thought like our like relationship was already like stable, things like that. And also I had like a vision of what I'm going to capture in future and who I'm going to interview in terms of like the story itself. But then like there were situations that like we almost lost access, things like that. And sometimes I thought things gonna happen, but it actually didn't happen. And at a certain point, I would think about whether I can still continue the project. So I feel like compared with like short films, I don't know, maybe again, it depends on like the subject and story. Maybe it's, less risky, to make it short because you will maybe film less, I think, and like spend like shorter time, with the subjects. But for feature, because it's such a long time, you don't know what's exactly gonna happen. So like when I was in that situation, I was so like worried about the project. I didn't really know what to do. And I was like, oh, what I'm gonna do. But after finish like this project, I just feel like, that's just normal. That just happened, in any long-term project. So just be prepared for anything that happen. Yeah.
To piggyback on that, no amount of preparation insulates you from things changing. You know what I mean? That in my personal experience, like on my feature, we had what you would think with all the money in the world and all the like, corporate support in the world. There's two big like studios and things still went wrong, like show up to location, there's no electricity. What are you talking about? So it's like, so like to piggyback on what Jenny's saying, like no amount of be prepared for things to go wrong and develop the skill to be able to pivot and improvise a little bit.
Yeah. Let's talk about some big, let's continue this concept or this conversation around like big ideas and big learning. So like Leslie, you brought up the art of negotiation. Why don't we all kind of talk about that a little bit? The idea of the little independent filmmakers talking to the big people in the room. It's like, how do you advocate for yourself? How do you get in the room also? And then once you get in the room, how do you push back and maintain as much as you can your creative freedom, and as much as you can what the story needs in a sense and what it needs as the director?
I'll start with the getting in the room thing, which is just back to what everyone has said about creating a proof of concept. I think like at this stage in our careers, going from shorts to feature, like having something that really shows what you're making. I have the same experience with every project as what Liz described. With like every project that I think I've done that's really good is very hard to describe in words. So if you can just have like a little proof of concept, 5 minutes is great. That'll help you get in the room, I think. Yeah. Or crazy access to something that nobody else has.
Totally. And the idea of advocating for yourself, what do we think about that? Because that's a hard thing.
I think that it's one thing is like it's a mindset shift that needs to take place, because the fact of the matter is if you're in the room, you're supposed to be there. You know what I mean? And be it conscious or unconscious, people will try to convince you that they're doing you a favor by letting you in the room. But the fact is, if you're in the room, they need you there. You know what I mean? This is a big lesson that I learned, after the fact of doing my feature. Just because these people are wearing suits and just because they're constantly mentioned in like Variety and Deadline articles doesn't mean they know doesn't mean they know better than you do what's right for your film. You know, you're in the room because you know what's right for your film, and you should, you know, it's hard, but you should advocate for the vision and the film, because like, you know, they're gonna try to convince you that the money is what matters. The quality of the film is what matters most. You know what I mean? You should be mindful of the money because, you know, they're giving you the greenery. You know what I mean? So like, but if you're in the room, it's because you have a perspective and they acknowledge that. And I think the hardest part of this for me, and something that I learned, is you have to acknowledge that you have a perspective that's worth listening to. Because at the end of the day, your name is going on it, you know? So don't operate from a point of like desperation, like, yo, I really need this to work. What you should be saying is like, in order for this to work, I need this. And it's their job to sort of like work with you to get to that point.
Amen to that. Liz, what do you think?
I think that's such a beautiful sentiment, and that's like an attitude that we should carry with ourselves everywhere. And I guess on the sort of opposite end of that is if you're not in the room, and if you don't make it into the room and you're still making your film, it can be also very freeing because you don't have to answer to suits. You're making it totally independently. And even if your budget is much, much lower, your first film is like this moment, at least for me, where I wasn't aware at all of any of the market forces, the commercial forces, where your film is going to land, how do you make back money, all of that stuff. And that naivete is something that now that I've finished my first film and have been through that process and know how hard it is and all the things that everyone always said, but I never took seriously, like that moment when you're hopping from the short to the feature, whether you get in the room or not, is like it was a great time to just be free, a little bit free, before you become more professionalized, if you don't get into the room.
That's a great point. Jenny, yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree with everyone. Because for me, right after I got out of school, there was a time like I feel really desperate. Because I feel like why no one really like the project, or why no one really like got the point of like what I'm going to do. And I heard, you know, like either in like work in progress screening or at pitch sessions, there were different like feedbacks and saying that like the audience would like this, the audience would like that, things like that. And I think I started to think about, you know, like what exactly I'm making. Is this the story I really want to tell? So I started to think a lot about that, and I kept getting like rejections, and there were some comments saying that like, oh, this story is not American enough. And so I tried to, you know, figure out what exactly I want to do. But I think what I did was right, was at the end of the day, this is still the story I want to tell. We did make some like adjustments in the post-production for the English speaking audience in terms of like subtitles or the voiceovers, things like that. But the core of the story didn't really change throughout the whole time. So yeah, and also I think just be optimistic. I just try to be optimistic. You don't really know what's gonna happen, right? So maybe you just keep working on your like project and someone just like it and give you a green light, and that's it. So never give up. I think that's another biggest lesson I learned, you know, from the whole process. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
To again, piggybacking on Jenny, the only time I've ever seen a film not get made is when people stop trying to make it. You know what I mean? That's literally the only time I've seen something not happen, is when someone stops trying to make it happen. So.
Yeah, I mean, we're in this industry because, and we do these things because we're so passionate about telling these really important stories, right? So it is about that long-term drive and persistence, right? What about in these long-term projects, having different stakeholders come in? Like Jenny, when you started, you know, your professor came in as a producer. Like, what is that process like? And do you guys think it's important? I mean, it's really hard to make something alone, right? Completely alone. So you want to have a golden circle of people who you trust, who are part of your story process. What tell us about the importance of like bringing in producers or executive producers. There's so many different ways of doing that. Jenny, why don't you start? Like, what was your experience like?
Yeah, I think it's very important to know like what you really need for the project. To find someone, first of all, like easy to work with, like personality wise, right? The other one is like the skill set. And for me, like at first I knew nothing, I knew nothing about the film industry. And I heard about, other stories that like, you work with the wrong person and the whole project became like a disaster. The whole experience was a disaster. So for me, first of all, like when I was still a student, I feel like I got along well with my professor. And I think we had like similar vision of like the storytelling and what the story eventually gonna be. So having him first came on board really helped me to at least, step into the documentary production like industry, at least in Chicago. So that's how like basically he opened the door for me and let me to explore. And then I think I just like spent time with like a lot of like local, fellow filmmakers and also some organizations. And I got into the fellowship, like I mentioned before. So that also helped me to kind of like connect me with a broader, I would say like the industry. And through the fellowship, actually, I got to pitch my film at Tribeca, the TFN network. So basically, it's just like step by step. And I think that was like maybe a year or a year and a half into production. Diane Kwan, who worked closely with Cartoon Films, she's interested in my film as well. So we brought her on board, and she's really good at working with distributors and to get money. So Brent, my former professor, he's more on the creative side with me. And Diane, she's really good at like marketing, getting the money, find the distributor. So I think that's how we build a team. And for me, I was a little bit hesitant to, bring on more people because sometimes like it will be difficult to delegate the duties. And I just want to make sure like the whole team is the most efficient. So that's how like we put together like the team. In terms of like post-production, it was again maybe like 2 years or a year and a half into production. We started to think about who we want to hire as an editor, who we want to hire as a colorist. So these are, the rest of the creative team, we hired them like later in production. So at first it's really about the directors and producers and how the vibe, between each other. So I think that's important. Yeah.
I was gonna say, like, vet your collaborators, like call references. You don't get a job anywhere without someone calling references. And I still like, even it goes both ways. It goes if you're hiring people to work like under your leadership, if you're hiring people to work alongside you or choosing to like take on as collaborators, or if you're choosing to work under someone, like ask around, call people they've worked with. It's normal, it's healthy. And it's like, I think every time that I feel like a little uncomfortable or a little bad, like, oh, this might offend this person or whatever, just remember, it's like, it's not about you, it's about your project. You're protecting your baby. Like, don't work with somebody unless you've talked to the people they've worked with, because it can be a really detrimental thing. Like, even if it's just creative differences. And like, I know we had to like consider that stuff with along the way working on Father Soldier Son, and some of the people we brought on, it's a lot like what Jenny said, like the someone who's good at business and negotiation. It's like, I've always felt like the thing that makes me a good documentarian, and this goes a little to the question in the chat that Shako wrote in, like how to stay motivated and not like lose yourself in your vision, is like, there were moments when we were making this where I would be like, what makes me good at being in the field with my subjects is the total opposite of what I need to be good in this boardroom right now with these people. It like shook my confidence. It made me feel like I'm good at my actual job. I'm just not good at the business of this job. So like, one thing is, I think if you love your project, somehow you'll be Jekyll and Hyde and you'll go into those meetings and you will pull a rabbit out of your ass and like actually be good at doing business if you love your project enough. But also, ideally, you can bring on collaborators who work with you, like in a producing role or in some sort of a EP role that fill that void where like the thing, you being sensitive and vulnerable and like small, like being small makes you good at being a documentarian. Like you don't want to take up a lot of space. You're looking to get the other person's story. You kind of want to disappear. Then you go into a board meeting and you're trying to get somebody to give you hundreds of thousands of dollars to complete a film. And you need to suddenly be like big and commanding. And it's just like so confusing. So I think those partnerships can be really helpful.
And I think that, to kind of piggyback on what Leslie just said, for me, the way to appear commanding is just knowing what the vision is and knowing what I'm talking about. Because all they're asking you is about your movie. That's all they're asking you is like, hey, what do you want? And you just have to know what you want and be able to articulate it. I, for one, like I'm really bad at, corporate business. I turn into like a cartoon character whenever I'm in a boardroom or something. I literally like write a script for myself and like rehearse it. Like, okay, and I do a decision tree in my head. Like they ask me this, I'm gonna say this. If they do this, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna do this. And that's worked for me. And to drive the point home of what everyone's saying, I've been in a situation before. I'm not gonna say what the situation is, but I've been in a situation where I was working with somebody that didn't have the same sensibilities as me. And nothing is harder than trying to resolve a conflict with someone that is not speaking the same language as you. Imagine you have some sort of conflict in life, like you're in a foreign country, you get in a car accident and people come to try to help you and you literally can't speak the language. It's like that. So make sure you're speaking the same language of everyone you're working with and settle for nothing less. Nothing less.
I feel like I'm learning so much from this panel, Quincy and Leslie and Jenny. And also I second and third what you said, like vet who you're going to work with. And you have to, and speaking your language, I think that's another way of saying like, you have to have chemistry with that person because this is a years-long process and chemistry is something that's like intangible, but it helps a lot right before a pitch meeting if you actually have genuine chemistry with your collaborators. And also, I think when you select your collaborators, they definitely should be maybe more experienced than you, or if they're not more experienced than you, then they should be much more fluid in things that you're lacking in. Like I was really bad at social media. And so I had an AP who was working with me and who became a co-producer who was really, really good at that. And then speaking to Shako, your question about how do you keep going, also those same collaborators are gonna be, the director often can have the most neuroses about the project. Those collaborators can also be sort of the reinforcing, like keep going, this project is worth it. And obviously if I could do it again, I would never question whether a project was worth it again. But when you're faced with a lot of external forces that are telling you maybe your project isn't worth it, then if you can't get it internal validation from yourself because you're making your first film, you don't have the experience to have and foresight to know that your project is gonna be worth it, which on this panel, we are all telling you that your project is worth it, then your collaborators should also be doing that role.
What about the paper trail in a sense? It's like when you decide to collaborate with someone or you decide to bring someone on as a collaborator or a producer or something, do y'all think it's important to get it down on paper as well and hash that out in the beginning so there isn't confusion halfway through when there are higher stakes, or what?
As soon as this thing is going, get something on paper, period. It's, for me, it's one thing when it's kind of nebulous. It's like, what even is this? When you're at that stage. But as soon as it gets to a point where it's like, okay, we're actually doing this, boom, And in some instances, even when it's nebulous, just figuring out like whose ideas are what's the credit gonna be. Sometimes that can get hairy. Just get a lawyer. Don't play around.
even if you're with a friend, right?
Yeah,
I mean, I think that's important. Yeah.
absolutely.
Anyone else on that, or the importance of contracts?
Yeah, I totally agree. I actually think, especially with a friend, because it's like it's not personal, and having someone mediate that process makes it way less personal.
And in your contracts, which you should do early on, there should be caveats like, if we don't raise any money, what happens then? If we raise this amount, what happens then? Like, you can stipulate all that stuff if you work with a lawyer.
Mm-hmm. Why don't we move on to you know, the idea that, okay, so you're kind of nearing the end of your production process, you're starting to edit, and the questions about distribution are starting to come up. There's so many different ways of bringing your film out into the world. Liz, you had a sales agent. I know. Leslie, I mean, you had, you know, Netflix and the Times in a sense came together. Jenny, Cartemquin, et cetera, Quincy, the network, right? The studio system in a sense. There's so many different ways of going about this. And also I think it's you know, there are lots of grants out there. There are lots of film festivals, tons, you know, rejection is the norm. You can spend so much time applying to things and not get it. I'm sure a lot of the people here are discouraged at, you know, at certain points in our audience, as well as, you know, we all go through that too. That's a very nebulous question. How, like, what are some pointers that you've learned along the way in terms of applying for grants or beginning to talk to people, stakeholders in a sense, and are sales agents necessary in a sense?
I know, like, I went to Locarno Film Festival once, and this really like auteur, important film director, Pedro Costa, he said sales agents were ruining independent film. But I think unless you're sort of very prominent, you probably do need a sales agent. And unless you want to be your own distributor or have the resources to have all those relationships or build all those relationships around the world to different buyers, for me at least, a sales agent was really important to the process of selling Stray, not just in America, but in the UK and in parts of Europe and Asia.
Just like sort of related to what Liz said, that I think it's important in this industry, which is hard to succeed in financially, to keep in perspective that sometimes you're getting advice from people who aren't taking, who maybe have, I don't mean this about that director, I just mean in general, that there are people in this field who will give you advice that's not in the realm of reality based on your financial situation. Like people who can self-finance something they're working on for 5 years. Maybe they sold a company once, or maybe they inherited some money, which is great for them. It can discourage you when you compare yourself. So it's just important to like understand where you're getting advice on that kind of thing from, and whether or not the situation that person's working in. Like when we were working on Father Soldier Son, I was also working as a full-time journalist at the Times. I had a salary. So like working on a project for 10 years, traveling a lot, it was a lot different for me than it was for a filmmaker. Like, so you have to take that into account when I'm telling you like, oh yeah, every weekend I was trying to go to the Aishas. It's like, well, maybe some people are like working on the weekends, you know. It's just important to like keep in mind the different places people are coming from.
And now is such a interesting, I mean, we're almost in a renaissance of outlets. You know, there's so many different ways a film can come out now compared to even like 10 or 15 years ago. It's like night and day. So it's a really exciting time. And whenever someone tells you that like something is ruining the business, or, you know, someone is like, this is the way you got to do it, kid, I always kind of shut them, like, you know, I listen to them with a filter, because there's no one way to distribute a film. There's no one way to make a film. There's no one way to like, you know, create a lifetime of a film. So it's like, whenever someone has an absolute like that, I kind of like, yeah, okay, buddy. But there's so many different ways to release a film. that, and I think it's important to, even when you're in a situation like me where the studio's like, it's almost telling me it's guaranteed to come out, it's not guaranteed. So you definitely have to have like a plan, and the sooner you come up with that plan, the better. Because like we said before, things change. You know, the pandemic came and a lot of people's films didn't come out. You know what I'm saying? So, you know, what happens after things change if they do? I think explore different avenues. You know, the point is for people to see the film. You know, so like, how do you make that happen? And think about it early.
Yeah, so for me, I feel like right now, you know, the big festivals, they are a good way to get interest from like sales agents and distributors. But you know, everyone knows like last year, so many film festivals got canceled. And in my case, the film was supposed to premiere at South by, and it was actually the first big festivals got canceled. And at that time, I mean, I'm glad that we had a sales agent already, because we didn't really know what's gonna happen next. And then we had other like festivals in spring, but everything got canceled. So we didn't really know what's gonna happen with the film. And we just feel like if it was not like with the help of sales agents, we would never really sell the film. I don't know, maybe, you know, things change later in the year, but I'm glad that we actually have a sales agent and helping on the, you know, selling the film on that part. So I think that's definitely helpful. But like Quincy said, like everything's changing. So right now, many people are doing like creative like distribution. Like there are so many ways to distribute a film. So you can't really say, you know, whether we really need sales agents in next 5 or 10 years. But I think at least for now in my film, like they really help, you know, selling the film. Yeah.
And the other part is, if you do get a sales agent, you need to get one. You need to make sure that that person is in your corner and doesn't just want to sell the film, but will advocate for it and get you the money that you need. Because you know, everyone does their own thing in the industry, but I've heard horror stories about sales agents, you know, kind of screwing people over. So as you get yours, if you do, you know, keep that in mind. The other aspect of that is, you know, Jenny, as you said, creative distribution and like impact campaigns and raising awareness about your film. That's really important as you kind of bring it towards the finish line. What do y'all think about that in terms of hyping it up to the general public? Because, you know, even if you sell it, you gotta still do a lot of work around that.
For me, one of the lessons I learned in what you should negotiate with a sales agent if you do use one or they come on board to your film is carving out your impact screening rights or even festival rights. So you like reserve some degree of control over whether you play at a festival, even if it doesn't help the bottom line of the sales agent or the distributor, that you can say yes to festivals that can't afford to pay for your film. And then also that you can do like non-theatrical impact screenings, especially in this day and age where so many films are not coming out in theaters or getting indefinitely delayed, that you still have some power in what you want to use your film for. Like our distributors were really gracious in letting us to create like dog rescue screenings or dog fundraising screenings, especially during the pandemic when it wasn't coming out in theaters anymore. So, but some people are, you know, you might not end up with a distributor or sales agent that's so generous. So making sure contractually that stuff is in your interest and you're retaining as much control as you can, because sales, these are businesses and their decisions oftentimes are driven by what the bottom line, like if it makes profit or not. But your intentions in making the film are not obviously not necessarily just that. You want as many people to see the film and you want the film to do have as much impact as you can on the communities that you want it to.
But Liz, maybe we could just stay with you for a second. The idea of people who work in the short space or in the journalism space often don't know about this whole other world of parsing out rights. So and you know, everyone here can speak to it, but like Quincy, your situation was, you know, the studio had the rights, right? And that's one way of doing it. And then the other way is carving out rights. So Liz, can you give us a little bit of a rundown in terms of, for folks who don't know, there's like educational rights, there's streaming, there's DVD, like what, and those can each be sold to different kinds of people and entities in a sense, right?
Yeah, I mean, just so you know, I didn't carve out my rights, and
Mm.
that's why I wish I had carved out my rights. But I feel lucky because my distributor and sales agents were pretty nice. Like, I would ask them for things and they would give me the things like the extra screenings and stuff like that. But if they weren't nice, which they could easily not be, because I didn't have that legal language involved. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. But in terms of specifics, I think there's educational, festival, and non-theatrical screenings, which would fall
Yep.
into like impact. But maybe other people know more.
Do you, like, I don't know all of them either. I think, you know, because there's so many in a sense, but, you know, there's like DVD, I think, like hard copy stuff. And then there's, right, as you said, theatrical, non-theatrical, festival, as you said, there's streaming. And then within streaming, in a sense, there's like US, international, all of these different things. And it's important to, when you get to that process, make sure that you don't just completely give over control. I mean, Jenny, when you like MTV Films came in, Kartemquin was part of it. What was your situation like?
Yeah, so Kartemquin is the production company of the film actually, and I think we just set up a Fanning Film, Kartemquin Film LLC, which is under the Kartemquin umbrella, and I have like part of the creative right to the film, and Kartemquin also have part of the creative right to the film. And I think after we sold the film to MTV, basically, I think we sold like all the rights to them. We didn't really carve out rights. I think we carve out like maybe a little bit like educational rights, and also we carve out, because they ask for worldwide rights, and we carve out the parts in China, because we feel like, first of all, we want to distribute the film in China, and we don't really know whether MTV would really like distribute the film in China. The second one is, since all the main subjects, they live in China, and this story itself, not about the film, but the story itself has such a huge impact in China. We want to make sure that it's publicized in a right way. So we decided to do the China distribution on our own. We find another distributor in China who we really trust to, handle everything. And in terms of the US, I think other than what MTV they've been doing, we are doing some community screenings with universities. But because we didn't really made it clear in our like contract about educational rights, we didn't go out. We don't go out a lot like for impact campaign. So basically what we do is, whenever like some universities, they want to do a screening for Fanning, they would ask us for a link, and then we will give them the link. So that's basically what we've been doing with impact and community. And if I can do it all over again, maybe I would like make it clear about what right we really want in the contract. Yeah.
And do you charge for your educational screenings?
You mean charge?
Yeah, did Kartemquin charge?
Yes, so it depends. Like if the university want to like put the film in their library or whatever, like there's a fee. And if there's like an individual like screening, there will be a fee. But it depends on like the capacity of the screening, and the whether they want to do like a physical screening or online streaming, and what the window would look like. So it depends on like different elements. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Leslie, anything to add?
I think COVID made it hard this year. I'm sure that others felt this way too. The same thing happened with me as with Liz. We didn't know to carve out those rights or to ask for those things. I think the biggest thing I would want to say is that at the end of the process of making your film, we talked about this and preparing for this talk, you feel a little gutted, like you feel, I think, quite depressed. This thing you've been working on so hard is over. And being able to truly be part of the communities that you hope will be impacted by this film, to see it with them in person, or just to know that it's being seen by people who might benefit from seeing it, I think is the medicine for that sadness. And so this is a little bit of a hypothetical thing, but hypothetically, had we been able to do that, had the film not come out during COVID, I think it would have been and will continue to be in my future projects a huge priority to be thinking about the impact campaign all along the way. Yeah.
I want to second what Leslie said, because when I set out to make Stray, I didn't think of it as like an advocacy film or a social justice type of film, but impact screenings can be a way for you to retain control and to create those physical experiences that probably are going to be less and less available to independent filmmakers. And so I wish I had brought on, well, had we been able to fundraise, I think portioning out money for an impact campaign, even before you have a festival premiere, is important. A lot of other films I noticed had this whole impact campaign in place, but we didn't, but it didn't matter anyway because Tribeca in 2020 was canceled for us. But that was something I didn't realize going into releasing my first film, that everybody else had these really robust impact campaigns built into even their festival premiere. And that it does make a difference.
So let's do about 15 more minutes. I have a couple more questions and then we'll open it up for questions. So folks who are watching, if you have questions, start drumming them up and feel free to pop them in the chat. Going to this idea of finishing your film and birthing it to the world, in a sense, shall we say, your first feature, right? In looking back, I believe that things happen as they should. So I don't want to say what would you do differently, but what are any other big learnings that you are going to take with you as you make your second feature? Because I'm sure everyone here is going to be doing another long-term project at some point.
It's an interesting question because, like, you know, as a screenwriter, oftentimes when there's something wrong with like the middle to end of the script, it's usually the fix is usually in the beginning. You know what I mean? So as you asked that question, I thought the same thing about like my experience making the film. A lot of the things that I ran into at the end of the process, like in post, were the direct result of something that I should have known in the beginning of the process. You know what I mean? Like during the development stages and the pre-production stages. So I don't know what the advice I have for that is. It's just something that I thought of, like, just be diligent at every stage, you know what I mean? And think about, think 10 steps ahead, so that, an issue that you run into, and for example, perfect example, again, without saying the specific project, throughout production, we, me and my producer were like, hey, we need to start thinking about who's going to color grade this thing, who's going to do the audio mix, and the financiers were like, you're fine. We'll worry about that later, and then it gets to later and it's like, you have to turn this around in 2 weeks and we don't have anyone to do color or sound. It's like, oh no, so it's like, it's stuff like that I learned in this project, where it's like, that thing that you should have handled earlier on, or you should have like pushed to handle earlier on, handle that, because later on you're going to need it, and you might need it sooner than you think. I hope that was articulate. I apologize.
That's very insightful. I think that's kind of like a life lesson in a sense, fixing things in the beginning. Anyone else?
And just piggybacking off of what Kinsey said, a lot of what you prepare ahead of time is what's going to end up at the end. Like especially as an independent filmmaker, everything you bring to the table is going to be what's driving the poster, what's driving the trailer, all of that stuff, which I think when we set out to make our films and we think it's getting distributed, you think, oh, everybody's gonna like do all these things, all the things, the marketing things, but it's actually a lot of it's on you.
Yeah, let me tell you, I designed the poster for my film. I composed the score for my film, and I did, you know, some of the lighter VFX for my film, all because at the end we didn't have anyone to do it. You know what I mean? And the deadline was coming. So, I mean, Elizabeth, what you just said is like so spot. I got chills because I was like, oh no, I kind of relapsed. I was like,
Yes, Steve.
you know, it was like, Quincy, we don't have a poster. It's like, Jesus Christ, let me get on Photoshop. You know?
And I mean, your distributors, maybe they will design something, but like if you have a vision in your head and you have a specific taste, you're the one who's going to have to bring it to the table. Don't expect that everybody knows what they're doing, which, you know, they do, but then, yeah.
I'm in the midst of still learning this right now, but trying to like stay on track with this thing that we will all experience, which is that like doc is so buzzy right now, and that some of the people that are making docs don't, it's the line between what is doc, what is reality TV, what is like what are the motivations behind the people who are creating the thing, are so blurred. And sometimes the flashiest projects with the most money come with the collaborators with the least integrity, frankly. Like, and you have to be really careful. Like, I think we have to be really careful with, if you're lucky enough to be like, once you make your first doc, and if someone ever wants to hire you to make more things again, I think like the desperation I felt early in my career, and still feel sometimes when I'm getting rejected constantly from grants, and like the tiniest things to the biggest things, like feel a lot of rejection. And this is a really scary industry and is not as reliable financially as other careers that people choose. Despite all of that, you're not just trying to protect your, you know, your IMDb or your 401k, or, you know, like you have to protect your desire to want to keep doing this. And like, if you work with the wrong set of people one time, I think that because the other stuff is so tenuous, it can make you question like, what is my role in this industry, and like, should I take these skills and go do something else? And just being really protective of what you choose to spend your time on and who you choose to do that with, because I do think that like after you've established yourself with one feature, opportunities will arise that might just not be the right thing. And also being really clear when you are doing a job that's to make money, which is great. We should do jobs to make money. I don't think there's any shame in doing something commercial or whatever to like sustain doing your doc work. But yeah, like having clear divisions on that stuff, because like I feel really like imperative that the like do no harm part of journalism for me has carried over to doc filmmaking. Unless you're trying to investigate and take down some scumbag, like you have to be thoughtful and methodical in the way you do your work and the people you choose to do it with, and hopefully share those values. So that's kind of the thing I'm taking forward.
That's such an important point, Leslie, and the integrity, to keep your morals and your integrity straight. That's a hard thing to do in this industry, especially as the media kind of swirls around and gets even weirder. Jenny, what do you think?
Yeah, I totally agree with Leslie. And I don't know, I feel like, you know, even with like the first, I would say like a first successful like feature film, it's still very hard to start over again to make another film. I mean, I feel like, you know, the challenges I'm facing, they are the exact same challenge I faced like in the past few years. But I think what's better right now is like, I know what can happen, you know, I know what's gonna happen. And I think I'm a little bit more prepared for my journeys in the next few years. And also like speaking about like what Leslie just said, like for me, I think this past year, you know, because of like COVID, like the feature I'm developing, there are some like problems. I can't really like film right now. So I'm doing like some other like gigs, some other projects, maybe like more commercial or something I don't really like, but I feel like I can just make some money. So I've been doing that. But I think there are a lot of times I start to think whether I really like it, and whether this is what I really want to do. So I think I'm glad like I'm finishing up some small gigs and I can kind of dive back to my own projects that I'm really passionate about. And yeah, I just like Lexi, I just feel like it's very important to find your like a vision and stand to your vision, you know, in the industry, no matter like what like other people they're doing. And I think another thing is for finding Ying, I feel like I was learning so much throughout the whole process. And there were a lot of situations that I realized that I should reach out to that person earlier in production or in development stage. So for me, like right now I'm doing my second feature, I would know when I should reach out to like whom. So I think that's really important. So everything can like be ready in early stage. So I won't like freak out, you know, like at the end of the day. So yeah, so these are my lessons.
And there's a lot of freaking out regardless when you're making your first feature, right? Can we all confirm that? So it's normal, y'all. If anyone has any questions, we have about 15 minutes left. Please drop them in the chat. And in the meantime, I think, Leslie, going back to your point about being kind of depressed after your feature comes out, I think that's just like a general also, you know, even for people who make shorts, everyone who's watching, I'm sure, you know, you work so hard for a month or two on something and then you put it out into the world and then it's like there and then what? You know, it's like you're done. You have to start from scratch, start from zero all over again. And then you think about doing that on a larger scale, and that's very augmented, right? But I think the cool thing is that it's a common feeling among people. Is that would we confirm that?
Yes, and I would think that not in addition to freaking out constantly because you're working on your first feature, I think people who can sustain freaking out constantly throughout their entire lives are the people that gravitate toward doing something this fucking hard.
Totally.
Because it's so hard.
Totally.
Yeah, and I think it seems like the second feature is that's a whole other panel. The second feature is probably harder than the first because you know what you're getting into and you're a little older, you have a little more to lose, and yeah. So.
Totally. And if they're not questions yet, if there's something that I want to take with me as I embark on my next project has to do with like the post-production process. I remember I had it felt like I overexposed my film to too many people before the vision of the film had been baked in yet. And I think preserving as much as you can be allowed to by whoever the stakeholders are or whatever labs you get into, not showing people until you've reached a cut that is actually your vision. Because when you show something half-baked, then you're getting all this feedback and it can like put you down rabbit holes. And I know Frederick Weissman said that his first film, To the Cut Follies, he showed it to people and early on in the cuts, and that was really confusing. And so subsequently, and obviously this is a privilege that he has, in every film he's edited since, he doesn't show anyone until it's picture locked. And that's probably what has allowed him to be, you know, have the status that he does, making these singular films. And so for me, even though that is probably not a real reality that is achievable, but at least trying to preserve as much space as you can with just yourself or your editor as you work through this, what the film is and how the film feels before other people start chiming in.
That's so important. Quincy, were you going to say something? What do you think?
No, I just fully agree with what everyone is saying. You know, I'm just sitting here vibing out because it's like, it's good for me to hear all this because I'm on the same page. You know what I mean? And especially the feeling of finishing a project the way I feel after, you know what I mean? Because like, I actually felt a great deal of guilt after I finished my project and I was depressed after, you know what I mean? And I was like, I should be thankful. I just did this awesome thing, you know? And I'm sitting here sad that it's over, you know what I mean? but the way I kind of cope with that is I have so many things that I want to do and that I am doing that I kind of just, as soon as one thing is over, once that feeling comes, I just start on the next thing, you know. I don't know if that's the healthiest way to go about it, you know, but it's working for me, you know.
I think if you can start on the next thing a little before you finish the first thing, the crossfade, but I don't know how to do it, but I keep trying to do it. But like if you can crossfade it instead of hard cut it, that's good.
I'm in a 3-tier crossfade right now. Like right now you're seeing me.
No dips.
Making an album and a movie.
Yeah, yeah.
And God knows.
I love it. Oh my God. Jenny, what do you think? Do you agree with this?
Yeah, so I think like again, like talking about like the pandemic, I basically stay at home, and like even till today, I don't think we ever have like in-person screening like with the film. So I feel like, you know, I didn't really, even though I've been attending like festivals virtually, but I don't really feel like I'm in the festival. And for me, that feels like the end of the film. And we didn't really have like impact campaign. And I've been like staying home thinking about what I'm gonna do next. And plus COVID, I'm so worried about like everything and my family in China. And I didn't really want to talk to people. Like there was like several months, but I ended up like visiting my friends in Champaign actually, where I filmed the project. I stayed with them like for 2 months without thinking anything. And I think also it was also during that time I started to do some research to think about what I really want to do next. Even though like I would like occasionally still feel like anxious about like what am I gonna do next, but I would try to calm down and to say like it's just normal like for everyone. And I would try to read like books from other like established filmmakers to see like how they were doing when they're young, when they finished like their first film, things like that. Yeah. And I think I'm doing okay right now. Like I think my second feature eventually has some breakthrough. I think I will like go into production very soon. So I think that's good. I think I've already like gradually like past that phase, you know, feel really anxious. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think it's just worth saying for everyone watching, because obviously this is a very insightful panel for folks who are just about to start their first features. These 4 individuals have extremely successfully, by all industry standards, made incredible features, and they have these feelings too. So it's okay, and it's going to be okay. As a last, because we don't have any questions, I have one last question. We have 10 minutes. Everyone here we didn't really talk about the depths of the post process. I feel like that's its own panel in a sense, but everyone here is a freelancer in a sense, not like an independent filmmaker, right? And advocating for yourself in terms of being paid, and also just the art of juggling long-term versus short-term projects. I think that would be a really important thing for us to touch on before we head out for the day. Obviously, it's a constant journey, but any particular insights that you would want to share, or things that you're discovering in this beautiful juggling process?
I have a lot to say about this, so if anyone wants to go first.
Quincy, you start. Go for it, man.
So I have one thing that I'm realizing as my wife and I just started a production company last year. So we're doing a lot more freelance work, because after my feature came out, I was like, I'm not going back to full time. And one thing I learned is it is better to have a small number of consistent high paying clients than a lot of low paying clients, you know? And that goes back to like knowing your worth and knowing what you need out of a client, and not just worrying about what they need from you. It's especially hard when you're one of these filmmakers like me who like kind of does everything, you know? a lot of times people see that and they're like, okay, we want to bring you on to direct this short doc for us. And you're like, great, I'll do it. And they're like, we also need you to do the audio mix, the color, and we need you to shoot it. We need you to edit it. And like, that can be fun because I like doing all that stuff, but they need to pay up. They need to pay for that. And I think asserting yourself and knowing that is really important. And what works for me is when I approach a long-term project, it has to be a passion project. And when I say long form, I'm talking like, you know, more than a month. You know what I mean? If someone wants me to like do a work for hire or freelance for more than 6 months, it's a no. You know what I mean? Because I didn't get into this to, you know, I don't want to sound reductive, but make your cheeky web video. You know, I got into this to
Totally.
make films, you know. I'm happy to help with your cheeky web video. I love that stuff, but I'm not going to spend more than a month working